The purpose of this screencast is threefold. First, I'm going to explain or provide an overview of what my final project is, which is called Minnesota Interviews. Second, I'm going to explain what we did before I took the course, Education 532 Seminar in Digital Literacy, and some of the problems we ran into, and some of them are quite significant because of what we were overlooking. And third, I'm going to provide some insights and show you some slides from the website where there have been vast improvements as a result of Education 532 Seminar in Digital Literacy. So some of the knowledge that I've gained that I've applied to this project. The Minnesota Interviews project culminates with a live performance. And so the students take on the persona of a person important to Minnesota's history or an influential American from Minnesota, and they are interviewed. And there's a lot of research that goes into the development of the questions as well as the answers to the questions, so the knowledge, so they really take on the person's life and sound like the words are coming from that person's mouth. If we look here, I have examples of past student work. You can see, for example, this girl is Rose Totino, Totino's Pizza Rolls. She was from northern Minnesota and now is a household name and has done television shows, etc. So this is the interviewer interviewing Rose Totino. And this is a reporter interviewing Charles Godard of the 1st Minnesota, which was a regiment during the Civil War and was particularly important to the victory at Gettysburg. And so here the interviewer is interviewing Charles Godard, and they both take on the personas of somebody living at the time. In order to get to that point of the interview night, the 6th graders, so this is a 6th grade project, are responsible for conducting a lot of research, and they follow something called AGOP. A stands for asking questions. We'll look over here. G stands for gathering information. O stands for organize and write. And P stands for publish and perform. Most of the changes I made after taking Education 532 occur in the gathering information phase, but I've also applied it to some of the asking question phase. And it's really changed how the students are going to be conducting research online. And you can see in here I mentioned some of the big changes. One of the biggest ones from the class is using the www framework for evaluating a website to see if it is relevant and reliable. And then I also use some methods for reading an online source or navigating it, and then also use some methods encountered in the class for comprehending a website. Pitfalls from before. So in the past, during this gathering information phase, students did very little evaluating of sources. And as a matter of fact, they were somewhat thrown to the wolves and out on their own surfing the internet with very little guidance, and often year after year we'd run into the same pitfalls of students using irrelevant sources or finding unreliable sources and then finding out too late that it was unreliable, etc. And then when we get to the note-taking phase, copying and pasting was going on, or students were putting down information that wasn't really relevant. And so taking the time to retool and rethink this project was really inspired by the critical evaluation unit that we did one of the weeks. So to take you into the site and to show you some of the changes made, I'll start with the asking questions phase. Now, eventually they get to asking questions in the interview, and that starts right from the get-go. So they have a question generator, and this question generator is explained how the assignment works up here. So these are some basics for getting it started, and that's on every single web page, is kind of an overview with purpose, learnings, and directions. Then I show a screencast of me completing this down below. And of course, this is what is a really good way to allow readers to constantly get into the habit of asking questions while they read, which is a wonderful way for them to encounter online sources and ensure comprehension. And it's also a great way to start developing questions that they later can apply to their research and to the actual published product of asking questions in the interview process. So in this screencast, I show myself doing this, and when I do it, I use Dred Scott. And Dred Scott lived at Fort Snelling, which is now in Minnesota, was then in Wisconsin Territory at the time, so he has a connection to Minnesota, and actually some of the court proceedings took place there in Scott versus Sanford. Then we move on to the question organizer. And I show myself conduct a screencast here of developing questions. And so the students, after doing the question generator, then list all the questions that they had on the generator, as well as any other questions that they gathered or came up with through discussions. And then they need to organize these questions into larger categories like early life, accomplishments and a major event, connections to Minnesota, the times in which the person lived, so the context, what was going on in America at the time, and then the impact of this person's life or the event that he or she took part in. So they're taking all the questions that they developed in the generator and organizing them on this Google Doc. Consequently, most of the Google Docs will be gathered from a classroom page that will accompany this website. So this is wonderful because now they have questions and tons of them going into their research, which are going to point them in the right direction for what websites to find and what parts of the website are useful. That takes us to the gathering information phase. You'll see that at the beginning of each one, I kind of give an overview of exactly what needs to be done for that phase. And they get into a keyword search. And so in the keyword search, I do a screencast of how I, using Dred Scott, have developed keywords, searches, so things that I'm actually going to use in my search engine, and ways that I can fully explore my topic. And it goes far beyond just putting in Dred Scott and life. And then even taking the students beyond Dred Scott into the times that he lived, like the antebellum period, or even causes of the Civil War. From there, evaluating websites. Again, I give an overview of the assignment. I provide a screencast, and this is the one where I put the most focus and time in on the students using KidRex, and also the students using www. And so you can see how that is explained here, all the steps that are taken. And then as I go through and come up with a website, I use the www. Steps in order to see if a website is worth using, and then how they can record their websites onto this Google Doc. So here is where I really applied a lot of what I learned in that critical evaluation unit. And then taking notes. Again, there is a screencast, and I show how I'm taking notes from an online source. And so a lot of steps for comprehending a text are used. So we kind of list the basics of the text at the top, and then they have to preview the text and provide some information for what are they going to learn from this particular website. We go into what a paraphrase note should look like so that students are avoiding copying and pasting or writing information directly from the source. And then some questions that will take them into new directions with their research at the bottom. And they're doing one of these for each one of the sources. As we move forward into organizing and writing, they're organizing their notes into another Google Doc where they now are putting them all into different categories. So what were just raw notes from several websites now are being fused together, and they're keeping track of where those notes came from, with a coding system. Then we move into interview scenario, and this is where they start to develop the story around their interview, and they fill this in. And then they start developing their script. So here's where the synthesis really happens, where they're taking the questions that they developed in the asking question phase, retooling them a little bit, and actually developing a script. And it's in here that I have past examples of student work of how other students developed a script. And so this one's for, I believe, Joseph Godfrey, who was a fur trader. And I think there's another one down here of Gag, who was an author from Minnesota. So they have past examples to look at of student work, which is helpful. Then they also have to write a summary paragraph. And for this, we kind of step away from the script for a little while and talk really about writing a summary. And on the website, there is an example. There's the ostrich, Kevin McHale from northern Minnesota. And then there's some revising and editing guides that help them get to the final product, and then rubrics for grading their work is on there. And then I take them to the publishing phase, which of course this has self-editing guides for the script, and then also past examples of student performances. So mainly, it was in this gathering information phase where I really applied what I learned in the evaluating, critical evaluation unit, and in some of the, all across the course of how to read a website, using some skills that are used on offline sources, as well as things, strategies particular to reading online sources and navigating. And a lot of those come across in these screencasts where I walk the students through the process. And so the idea is that they will watch the screencast as homework. So then when they come into class, they will have the knowledge of what to do. And the beauty of the screencast, which has really changed my teaching, is that students can return to them time and time again. It shows my mind and how I'm working through a problem or a challenge. And also it's wonderful for differentiation. Students that struggle to put concepts together, or my real literal thinkers, really react well and respond well to screencasts. It kind of speaks their language, and they can see my thought processes at work, and that helps them develop those habits kind of in the reciprocal teaching mode. So this has been an overview of my kind of retooling, really massively retooling the Minnesota interviews. And already I'm working with the two colleagues I teach with to reimagine this so that we are using a lot of teaching as much about how to use the internet as we are about the content. The content of the Minnesota interviews of the important, influential Minnesota people is driven by the skills they're going to learn in evaluating sources and reading online sources. Thank you for listening.